The gunshot cracked through our backyard before I even understood what was happening. My wife, Marin, collapsed beside the smoking grill, blood spreading across her sundress. I screamed her name, dropping the tongs, my hands shaking as I pressed them to her side. 12 feet away stood Deborah Voss, our HOA president, still holding the pistol like it was nothing. She was violating the covenant, Deborah said flatly, as if that explained everything. Neighbors poured out of their houses, phones raised, sirens already wailing in the distance. I want you to understand something before I go further. None of this had to happen. It started 8 months earlier, over something so small it's almost funny now. My name is William Carter. I'm an electrician. Marin was a nurse at St. Agnes Memorial. We'd bought our house in Willow Creek Estates because it was quiet, affordable, and had a big backyard. We didn't know that backyard would become a battlefield. Willow Creek's HOA was run by a 5-person board, and Deborah Voss sat at its head. She was strict about grass height, mailbox color, even the shade of white on your shutters. But her real obsession was food, specifically, meat. Deborah had gone vegan 2 years prior and treated it like a religious crusade. She'd once left an anonymous note on a neighbor's door reading "murderer" after a rack of ribs. We laughed about it at first. Marin called her the tofu tyrant. We should have taken it more seriously. The first fine arrived in March, $200 for offensive cooking odors. I called the HOA office, certain it was a clerical error. It wasn't. Deborah herself had filed the complaint after smelling our Sunday brisket from her yard. Smoke drifts across property lines, she told me. That's a nuisance violation. I checked the covenant. There was no rule against grilling meat. I told her so. She smiled thinly. I'll be updating the bylaws soon enough. That should have been my first warning. She meant it as a threat, not small talk. 2 weeks later, a new rule appeared in the HOA newsletter. Restricted grilling hours, 2 to 4 p.m. only. It applied to the entire neighborhood, but everyone knew who it was really for. Neighbors grumbled, but most just adjusted their schedules and moved on. Marin wasn't willing to move on. This is bullying with a clipboard, she said. I didn't disagree, but I told her to pick her battles. I didn't want a war. Deborah, however, had already declared one. She just hadn't told us the rules yet. The fines kept coming. A crooked fence post, a too bright porch light, a garden gnome deemed unsightly. Each fine was petty, legal on paper, and impossible to fight without a lawyer. We started keeping folders, photos, timestamps, copies of every citation. Marin said it was for our sanity. I think some part of her already sensed we'd need it. By May, the fines totaled almost $1,100. We attended an HOA meeting to contest them. Deborah ran it like a courtroom she owned. She dismissed our objections in under 90 seconds, gaveling us into silence. The board has spoken, she said, though the board barely spoke at all. She did. Walking out, another resident, Priya from 2 doors down, pulled us aside. She did this to the Alvarez family last year, Priya whispered. They moved out within 6 months. That was the first time I realized this wasn't new behavior. It was a pattern. I started researching Deborah Voss. Public records, old HOA minutes, small claims filings. What I found was unsettling. 3 prior HOA boards, 3 sudden resignations of other members. Each departing member had cited personal reasons. None would speak to me on the phone. One, a retired teacher named Frank, finally agreed to meet me at a diner. She keeps a file on everyone, Frank said quietly. Debts, divorces, anything she can use. He wouldn't say more. He looked genuinely afraid of her. I told Marin everything that night. She went pale, then furious. So she's not just petty, Marin said. She's dangerous. And nobody's stopped her because nobody's tried. We decided right there at the kitchen table that we would be the ones who tried. Not with confrontation. Deborah thrived on confrontation. We'd fight with documentation instead. Marin started a spreadsheet. Every fine, every rule change, every date, cross-referenced. I installed a doorbell camera, officially for security, unofficially for evidence. We told no one else in the neighborhood what we were building, not yet. Summer arrived, and with it, Deborah's new pet project, a total grilling ban. She framed it as an environmental initiative for the whole community's air quality. Residents were furious, but many were too intimidated by past fines to object publicly. At the next meeting, Deborah proposed the ban with a slideshow about carbon footprints. I raised my hand and asked where in the covenant the board got authority for this. She said the board had emergency discretionary powers. I asked to see that clause in writing. She couldn't produce it. The room went quiet. For once, she looked rattled. "I'll email it to you," she snapped, and moved to the next agenda item. She never sent that email. That was twist number 1. The rule didn't exist. She was inventing authority. Marin squeezed my hand under the table. "She's making it up as she goes," she whispered. That night, we filed our first formal complaint with the county HOA oversight office. 2 weeks passed with no response. Bureaucracy, we learned, moves slower than tyranny. Meanwhile, Deborah escalated. She began drive-by inspections of our yard, unannounced. She photographed our grill from the sidewalk, cataloging it like evidence in a trial. Marin joked that Deborah probably had a shrine to the covenant in her closet. We laughed, but the joke curdled fast, because Deborah showed up again the next morning, uninvited. She stood at our fence line with a tape measure, insisting our fire pit was 6 inches too close. I asked her to leave our property. She said the sidewalk was technically HOA jurisdiction. It wasn't. I knew the plat map by heart at that point. She was bluffing again. But bluffs backed by fines still cost real money, and we were tired of paying them. Priya told us she'd started recording Deborah's harassment too. We weren't the only targets anymore. A small coalition began forming, 5 households, all quietly gathering their own paper trails. We agreed to pool everything into one master file. Strength, we realized, was in numbers. Deborah must have sensed the shift, because her tactics turned sharper, more personal. She began mentioning Marin's job at the hospital in her citation letters, oddly specific. Nurses should know better about health codes. One letter read, felt like a threat. Marin reported it to hospital HR, just in case Deborah tried contacting her employer directly. 2 days later, Marin's supervisor mentioned an anonymous call questioning her professional conduct at home. That was the moment I understood. Deborah wasn't just controlling. She was obsessive and escalating fast. I confronted her at her mailbox, calmly, camera rolling from my jacket pocket. "Stay away from my wife's job," I said. She smiled and said she didn't know what I meant, but her eyes flickered, the tell of someone caught, not someone innocent. That evening, our coalition met at Priya's house, 6 families now, laying every file on the table. Frank, the retired board member, finally agreed to give a signed statement about Deborah's past intimidation. We now had a pattern spanning 4 years and 3 prior victims. It wasn't circumstantial anymore. We hired a lawyer, Denise Okafor, who specialized in HOA governance disputes. She reviewed our folder and actually whistled. "This is the most organized case file I've seen from residents." Denise explained we could petition for Deborah's removal under the state's HOA fiduciary duty statute. It required a supermajority vote and formal notice, a slow process but a real one. We began quietly gathering signatures, careful not to tip Deborah off too soon. For a few weeks, an uneasy calm settled over the neighborhood. Almost peaceful. Almost. Then Deborah announced a community potluck. Strangely generous, strangely well-timed. Marin was suspicious. "She never does anything without an angle," she said. We went anyway, cameras discreetly running, curious what she was planning. Deborah greeted us warmly at the door, too warmly, like a hostess auditioning for kindness. She'd catered the entire event vegan, insisting it united everyone under healthier values. Halfway through, she cornered me by the drink table, voice low and cold. "I know about your little petition," she said. 15 signatures. Not enough. My stomach dropped. How did she know the exact number? Someone in our coalition had leaked it. That was twist number 2. A mole. Someone we trusted was feeding Deborah information. I said nothing, just excused myself, mind racing through every face at that potluck. Marin and I drove home in silence, replaying every coalition meeting, every shared file. We narrowed it to one man, Greg, who joined late and asked a lot of specific questions. Denise advised we split future information, give Greg fake details and see if they surfaced. A week later, Deborah mentioned a fabricated second lawyer we'd invented purely as bait. Greg was the leak, confirmed. We quietly cut him from every future communication. But the damage was done. Deborah now knew we were organizing a removal vote. She struck first, filing a defamation threat against Priya for spreading false rumors. It was a scare tactic, but it worked on some. 2 households quietly withdrew their signatures. Our coalition shrank from 6 families to 4. Momentum was slipping through our fingers. Denise reminded us that 4 households, if firm, could still trigger the process, just slower. Deborah, sensing weakness, escalated further. She proposed an emergency assessment fee, $3,000 per household. Officially, it was for landscaping improvements. Unofficially, it was aimed straight at those still fighting her. Families who couldn't pay risked liens on their homes. It was financial warfare disguised as bureaucracy. Marin and I scraped together the payment, refusing to give Deborah any excuse to come after our house. Priya couldn't afford it as easily. A lien notice arrived at her door within 3 weeks. We felt the walls closing in. Deborah wasn't just petty anymore. She was ruthless, calculated, dangerous. Denise found something buried in the fee ordinance. It had never been properly voted on by the full board. Twist number 3. Deborah had forged board approval, using an old meeting's minutes as cover. We now had proof of financial fraud, not just harassment. This was no longer just an HOA dispute. Denise filed a formal report with the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. Investigators requested records. Deborah, for the first time, seemed to realize she might actually lose. She began showing up at our house more often, ostensibly for inspections that had no legal basis. One evening she parked directly across the street and simply watched us through binoculars for an hour. Marin called it stalking. I called the non-emergency police line. An officer took a report, nothing more. Civil matter, he said. Unless she trespasses or threatens you directly, our hands are tied. That gap between menace and provable crime became the space Deborah operated in for months. She started leaving handwritten notes, always just short of a threat, always deniable. Careful what you build. One note read, taped to our grill. We photographed everything. The investigation into the fraudulent fee dragged through summer into early fall. Deborah, cornered, doubled down publicly, hosting town halls painting herself as a victim of harassment. She claimed we were bullying an elderly woman over misunderstandings. Some neighbors believed her. It was surreal watching someone rewrite reality in real time and have people applaud her for it. Frank, the retired board member, finally spoke publicly, describing years of Deborah's manipulation in detail. His testimony cracked her narrative. People who'd believed her began quietly reaching back out to us. Our coalition grew again, this time stronger, fueled by anger instead of fear. Denise told us the state investigation would likely conclude within weeks, possibly with real penalties. Deborah must have known it too, because her behavior grew erratic, almost desperate. She started attending every neighborhood gathering, watching us, taking notes on who talked to whom. Marin began carrying pepper spray on her walks. I didn't blame her. Something felt like it was building. In late September, the county notified Deborah she'd face a formal hearing over the fraudulent assessment. She was also informed her HOA presidency could be suspended pending the outcome. That Saturday, we planned a small backyard barbecue to celebrate. Nothing wild, just family and Priya's kids. We stayed carefully within the approved hours, determined not to give her any legal opening. Marin lit the grill at 2:15 p.m., laughing with Priya about how far we'd come. At 2:40, Deborah appeared at the edge of our yard, uninvited, face pale and shaking with rage. "You're destroying everything I built," she said, voice cracking, no longer composed or calculating. I stepped forward, telling her to leave, that this was private property and she had no right to be there. She reached into her cardigan pocket. I thought it was another notepad, another citation. It wasn't. It was a small revolver, one she'd apparently owned for years, licensed, legal, always loaded. "Nobody takes this from me," she said. And in that instant, everything slowed down. Marin stepped between us, instinct over thought, the way she always protected people at work. The shot rang out before I could even shout a warning. Marin fell against the grill, and I was on my knees beside her before I even registered the sound. Priya screamed, pulling her kids back, dialing 911 with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Deborah stood frozen, gun still raised, as if she hadn't quite believed she'd actually pulled the trigger. I pressed both hands against Marin's side, screaming her name, begging her to stay with me. Sirens arrived faster than I expected, but every second felt like an hour underwater. Paramedics worked on Marin in our driveway, while police wrestled the gun from Deborah's still hand. She didn't run. She didn't resist. She just kept repeating, she was trespassing on the covenant. That was twist number 4. Even facing arrest, Deborah still believed the rules justified anything. Marin was rushed into surgery. The bullet had missed her spine by less than an inch. I sat in a hospital hallway for 6 hours, replaying every fine, every note, every warning sign. Denise arrived before midnight, already assembling our entire case file for the prosecutor. The state investigation into the fraudulent assessment suddenly became evidence in a much larger criminal case. Deborah was charged with attempted murder, later upgraded once prosecutors reviewed her documented pattern of escalation. Detectives searched her home and found something none of us expected: a locked filing cabinet. Inside were dossiers on every resident she'd ever find, including private medical and financial details. Twist number 5, Deborah had been illegally accessing information through a cousin who worked at the county records office. That cousin was arrested within days, flipping quickly, corroborating years of Deborah's obsessive surveillance. The case exploded beyond our small neighborhood, picked up by local news, then national outlets. Vegan HOA president shoots neighbor over grilling dispute, trended for nearly a week. Reporters camped outside our house. I hated it, but I also understood. This story mattered beyond us. Marin woke from surgery groggy but alive, her first words asking if I was okay. I broke down right there in the recovery room, the fear of the last 12 hours finally releasing. Word spread through Willow Creek fast. Neighbors who'd once feared Deborah now openly shared their own stories. Priya organized a fund for Marin's recovery. Within 2 days, it had raised more than $8,000. Frank visited the hospital, quietly apologizing for not speaking up years earlier, when it might have prevented all this. I told him none of us could have known it would end in gunfire. None of us wanted to believe it. Denise informed us the district attorney intended to pursue the maximum sentence, citing premeditation and past intimidation. Deborah's defense attorney tried arguing diminished capacity, claiming stress from community responsibilities clouded her judgment. The jury, shown years of documented fines, threats, and the illegal surveillance file, didn't buy it for a second. During the trial, prosecutors revealed Deborah had researched firearm laws months before the shooting. Twist number 6. She hadn't just snapped that day. She'd been preparing an excuse for a long time. Text messages recovered from her phone showed her telling a friend, "One day someone will push me too far." It read less like a warning to herself and more like a plan she was quietly building toward. Marin testified from a wheelchair, calm and clear, describing 4 years of escalating harassment in exact detail. Her nursing colleagues later said they'd never seen someone so composed while reliving something so violent. I testified next, walking the jury through every citation, every fine, every fabricated rule Deborah had invented. The prosecution entered our entire spreadsheet into evidence. Years of quiet documentation finally speaking loudly. Deborah's own former board members, including Frank, testified about her pattern of manufactured authority and threats. The defense's case crumbled further when the cousin from records testified against her under a plea deal. Closing arguments painted two very different pictures: a broken woman under stress or a calculated tyrant with a gun. The jury deliberated for just under 6 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty. Attempted murder in the first degree, plus additional counts of fraud and illegal surveillance. The courtroom was silent except for Priya's quiet sob of relief beside me. Deborah showed no visible emotion, still seemingly convinced she'd simply been defending her authority. At sentencing, the judge cited her total lack of remorse as an aggravating factor. "You didn't just break a law," the judge said. "You weaponized your position to terrorize an entire community." Deborah Voss was sentenced to 25 years in state prison, eligible for parole only after 15. She was also permanently barred from serving on any homeowners association board in the state. As deputies led her away, she turned once, looking not at me, but past me, expressionless. It wasn't the dramatic collapse I'd imagined during all those sleepless nights. It was just quiet. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. I said only one thing: we just wanted to grill in peace. The clip went viral within hours, somehow both absurd and completely true. Willow Creek's HOA was placed under temporary county oversight while new bylaws were drafted from scratch. Every fraudulent fine, including the illegal $3,000 assessment, was refunded to affected residents. Priya's lien was dissolved. Frank was invited back to help rebuild the board with real transparency. The neighborhood held its first truly voluntary potluck in years: meat, vegan dishes, and everything in between. Nobody measured fire pits with a tape measure. Nobody left threatening notes on mailboxes. Marin's recovery was long. Physical therapy twice a week, nerve pain that flared without warning. She couldn't return to bedside nursing the way she used to. Some things even victory couldn't undo. That was the cost we carried quietly, beneath all the news coverage and community relief. Some nights she still flinched at the sound of a car door closing too hard outside. I never told her, but I flinched too, every single time I lit that same grill again. We kept it though. Selling it felt like letting Deborah win some small, invisible war. A year later, Marin transitioned into hospital administration, using her experience to advocate for workplace safety policy. I started volunteering, helping other residents in nearby HOAs document harassment before it escalated into something worse. Denise took on 3 similar cases within the following year, citing ours as the template that worked. Frank became the new HOA president, running meetings with a transparency Deborah never once considered. Greg, the mole, eventually apologized, admitting Deborah had blackmailed him over an old debt to secure his silence. We forgave him, mostly. Fear makes people do things they wouldn't otherwise choose. We understood that better than most. Priya's family stayed in Willow Creek, planting a small vegetable garden where the old fear used to live. Sometimes people ask if it was worth it, all those months of documentation, of quiet nights building a case. I tell them the truth: we didn't set out for justice. We just wanted to stop being afraid. Justice arrived anyway, slower than we wanted, heavier than we expected, but it arrived. Deborah writes letters sometimes, from prison, still insisting she was simply protecting community standards. We don't read them anymore. Some doors are better left closed for good. On the anniversary of the shooting, we don't throw a party. We just grill quietly together, alive. Marin always says the smoke smells like freedom now, not like something worth apologizing for. I think about Frank's warning that first year, how none of us believed control could turn violent so fast. It can. It did. And it left scars that no verdict could fully erase, even a righteous one. But we're still here, still grilling, still choosing peace over fear, one ordinary Saturday at a time.